In the vast blue emptiness of the Pacific Ocean during World War II, distance was everything. After the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Imperial Japan moved quickly. Island after island fell under Japanese control. From the Philippines to the Solomon Islands, from Wake Island to vast chains of coral atolls, Japan expanded its defensive perimeter across thousands of miles of ocean. Each island was not just a dot on a map, it was a stepping stone, a shield, a refueling stop, a runway, a warning post. The Japanese High Command understood one critical truth. Whoever controlled the islands controlled the sea lanes, and whoever controlled the sea lanes controlled the war. For Japan, building fortified naval and air bases across the Pacific was essential. These bases would allow aircraft to patrol vast stretches of ocean, detect enemy fleets long before they could strike, and launch bombers against approaching forces. Naval facilities would refuel warships, repair damaged vessels, and store ammunition and fuel. Without such infrastructure, fleets were blind and vulnerable. But constructing a major naval base in the Pacific was no simple task. The islands themselves were hostile environments. Many were covered in thick jungle, tangled roots, and razor-sharp coral formations. The heat was suffocating. Tropical diseases like malaria and dengue fever were constant threats. Fresh water was scarce. There were no roads, no ports, no power grids. Everything, every plank of wood, every steel beam, every gallon of fuel had to be shipped across thousands of miles of open ocean. Japanese military planners, known for their meticulous calculations, estimated that transforming one of these remote islands into a fully functional naval base would take years. Heavy equipment had to be transported carefully. Runways required leveling uneven coral terrain. Docks had to be engineered against powerful tides and unpredictable storms. Defensive fortifications, bunkers, artillery positions, anti-aircraft batteries needed time and manpower. Time was the one resource Japan believed it possessed. Their strategy relied on building a vast defensive ring strong enough to discourage any American counteroffensive. If the United States attempted to push westward across the Pacific, they would have to assault heavily fortified islands one by one. Each assault would cost enormous casualties. Each delay would stretch American supply lines thinner. Japanese commanders believed that such a slow, grinding advance would force the United States into a negotiated peace. But this assumption rested on a critical belief that construction and logistics in the Pacific were inherently slow. At the beginning of the war, the United States seemed unprepared for such a challenge. The attack on Pearl Harbor had crippled much of the Pacific Fleet. American forces were scattered, shipyards were overwhelmed, and building major bases across hostile ocean distances seemed nearly impossible. Yet beneath the surface, something powerful was stirring in America. The United States was not only a military power, it was an industrial giant. Its factories could produce ships, aircraft, vehicles, and heavy machinery at astonishing speed. Its workforce included engineers, bridge builders, steel workers, electricians, and construction foremen accustomed to working on massive projects under tight deadlines. What Japan underestimated was not American courage, it was American construction capability. Across the Pacific, as Japanese engineers surveyed coral ridges and dense jungle, they calculated in years. They imagined that any invading force would face the same limitations they did: slow transport, limited machinery, exhausting labor. They did not yet understand that the United States would bring something entirely different to the war. The Pacific theater was unlike Europe. In Europe, armies fought across connected land masses. Supply lines could be established through railways and roads. In the Pacific, every battle was an amphibious gamble. Troops had to land from the sea, Supplies had to follow. Aircraft needed runways carved from wilderness almost immediately, or else the island could not be held. An island without an airfield was an island already lost. As 1942 unfolded, the United States began planning a bold strategy: island hopping. Instead of attacking every Japanese stronghold, American forces would bypass heavily fortified positions and seize strategically valuable islands. Each captured island would become a new base, a launching point for the next offensive. But this strategy depended on speed. Capture an island, and within weeks it needed to transform into a functional naval and air hub. Runways, fuel depots, hospitals, repair stations, defensive guns, all built from nothing. The Japanese command believed such rapid transformation was impossible. Experience had taught them that even modest facilities required extended preparation. Tropical conditions slowed progress, equipment broke down, labor forces fatigued. In their view, nature itself was an ally. And so, when Japanese officers estimated that building a major naval base in such conditions would take years, they were not exaggerating. They were speaking from experience. But wars are often decided not by what seems reasonable, but by what one side fails to imagine. Across the Pacific, a new kind of force was preparing to challenge those assumptions. A force not only of soldiers, but of builders, men who carried rifles in one hand and blueprints in the other. Men trained to pour concrete under fire, to blast coral reefs into runways, to erect docks before the enemy could regroup. At this moment in the war, Japan believed time was on its side. They believed the ocean was too vast, the islands too rugged, the construction too complex. They believed building a fully operational naval base in mere weeks was beyond the limits of reality. They were about to be proven wrong. By early 1942, the United States Navy faced a problem it had never truly prepared for. The war in the Pacific was not going to be decided by battleships alone. It would be decided by logistics, by airfields carved out of jungle, by docks built where no harbor existed, by fuel depots raised on coral islands that had never known electricity. But there was a dangerous gap in American military structure. Before the war, the Navy relied on civilian construction contractors to build overseas bases. These contractors were skilled: engineers, electricians, crane operators, steel workers, but they were not soldiers. International law prohibited civilians from carrying weapons in combat zones. If they were captured while resisting, they could be executed as unlawful combatants. And in the Pacific, construction zones were combat zones. The early months of the war made that brutally clear. Japanese forces moved fast. Islands thought to be secure fell suddenly. Civilian construction workers were left exposed, unarmed, and vulnerable. The Navy needed builders, but it also needed fighters. So in March 1942, the U.S. Navy created something entirely new: the Naval Construction Battalions. Their nickname came almost immediately: Seabees, from construction battalions. Spoken aloud, it sounded like Seabees. The name stuck. But the Seabees were more than a clever nickname. They were a radical idea. These were not ordinary recruits. The Navy did not fill their ranks with teenagers straight out of school. Instead, they sought experienced tradesmen, men in their late 20s, 30s, even 40s, bridge builders from the Midwest, steel workers from Pittsburgh, electricians from New York, heavy equipment operators who had built highways and skyscrapers during America's industrial boom. Many had families, many had established careers. They were not drawn by adventure alone, they were drawn by necessity. When they joined, they became both craftsmen and combatants. Seabees received military training alongside their construction instruction. They learned to fire rifles and machine guns. They trained in small unit tactics. They practiced beach landings. They drilled under simulated air attack conditions. Their official motto captured their dual identity: we build, we fight. And they meant it. Unlike civilian contractors, Seabees were fully enlisted members of the Navy. They could legally carry weapons, they could defend themselves, and if necessary, they could fight as infantry until regular combat forces secured the area. The Navy understood something critical: speed would win the Pacific War. When Marines or Army units captured an island, that victory meant little if the island could not immediately support aircraft and ships. Without air cover, the next assault would stall. Without fuel depots, fleets would be forced to retreat hundreds of miles to resupply. The Seabees were designed to solve that problem. Their equipment reflected America's industrial might: bulldozers, graders, rock crushers, portable sawmills, concrete mixers, prefabricated steel structures, everything that could be loaded onto ships and delivered to a raw shoreline. They trained to work in conditions most builders would consider impossible: tropical heat, monsoon rains, swamps filled with insects, coral so dense it had to be blasted apart with explosives before it could be leveled. And they trained to do it fast. American war planners were already developing what would become known as the island-hopping strategy. Instead of attacking every Japanese-held position, U.S. forces would leapfrog across the Pacific, capturing key islands and turning them into forward operating bases. But this strategy depended on one thing: rapid transformation. An island captured on Monday needed a runway by the following weeks. A beach landing site needed to become a deep-water dock capable of unloading tanks and fuel drums almost immediately. The Seabees practiced unloading equipment directly from landing craft under simulated enemy fire. They learned to assemble portable piers in sections. They mastered the use of Marston mat, pierced steel planking that could be laid over unstable ground to create instant airstrips. Every hour mattered. What made the Seabees especially formidable was not just their technical skill, but their mentality. These were men who had built America's highways, dams, and factories during the Great Depression. They were accustomed to long hours and harsh conditions. Many had worked through economic hardship. Now they applied that same endurance to wartime construction. Japanese planners believed major naval bases required years of methodical development. The Seabees were preparing to compress years into weeks. Their presence also changed morale. When Marines saw bulldozers rolling ashore alongside tanks, they knew that victory meant permanence. They knew that once the Seabees arrived, the island would not merely be held, it would be transformed. By late 1942, the first Seabee units were already proving their worth in the Pacific. On newly captured islands, they repaired bombed airstrips in days. They erected hospitals from prefabricated parts. They constructed fuel storage facilities capable of sustaining entire fleets. And they did it often within range of enemy artillery. The Japanese still believed the Pacific's vast distances and hostile terrain were natural barriers to rapid expansion. But they had not accounted for a force of armed engineers trained to defy terrain itself. The Seabees were not glamorous. They were not fighter aces or submarine commanders. Their weapons were often cranes and welding torches. Yet in a war defined by supply lines and air superiority, they were becoming one of the most decisive forces in the Pacific. Because in modern warfare, the side that builds fastest does not just survive, it advances. And soon, on a remote island where Japanese officers believed construction would take years, the Seabees would be given a challenge that would test everything they had trained for. 50 days. What followed would shock the enemy, and redefine what was possible in wartime engineering. When the island was finally secured, it did not look like the future site of a naval stronghold. It looked like chaos. Burned-out palm trees, craters filled with seawater, twisted metal from destroyed aircraft, the smell of cordite still hanging in the humid air. The battle had only just ended, and already a new operation was beginning. Within hours of the fighting subsiding, landing craft approached the shore again, but this time not with infantry. They carried bulldozers. They carried cranes. They carried men who had come not to seize ground, but to reshape it. The Seabees stepped onto the beach with rifles slung over their shoulders and toolkits in hand. There was no pause for ceremony, no time to admire the view. Japanese forces in nearby islands still had aircraft capable of launching raids. The threat of artillery or infiltration was real. The order was simple: begin immediately. The first problem was the terrain itself. The island was composed largely of coral, hard, uneven, and razor-sharp. It could support weight, but not without leveling. Jungle growth covered much of the usable land. Thick roots twisted deep into the soil. Clearing it by hand would take months. So the Seabees turned to explosives. Controlled blasts shattered coral ridges. Bulldozers pushed debris aside in thick clouds of dust. Graders flattened the broken surface inch by inch. Chainsaws roared through palm trunks. Within days, what had been dense jungle began to resemble the outline of an airfield. But the pace was relentless. They worked in shifts around the clock, 24 hours a day. Under floodlights powered by portable generators, crews continued leveling ground long after sunset. Sleep came in short rotations, often on cots set up beside half-finished construction sites. The heat was suffocating. Temperatures climbed well above 90 degrees. Humidity wrapped around the men like a wet blanket. Sweat soaked uniforms within minutes. Coral dust coated skin and lungs. Tools burned hot to the touch. And then came the air raids. Japanese aircraft, determined to disrupt construction, struck repeatedly. Sirens wailed. Work stopped. Men grabbed helmets and rifles. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire as bombs fell toward the partially completed runway. Sometimes explosions undid hours of progress in seconds. When the raid ended, the Seabees returned to their machines. They filled craters, re-leveled surfaces, repaired damaged equipment, and kept building. The urgency was not abstract. Until the runway was operational, American aircraft could not provide consistent air cover. Without air cover, the island remained vulnerable. Every day without a functioning base was a day the enemy could counterattack. So the Seabees improvised. One of their most powerful tools was pierced steel planking, sheets of interlocking steel known as Marston mat. Laid over compacted coral, these panels created stable landing surfaces almost instantly. Trucks hauled them into position. Crews locked them together like giant puzzle pieces. Where traditional concrete runways might take months, steel matting allowed aircraft to land in a fraction of the time. Meanwhile, another crew worked along the shoreline. There was no natural harbor deep enough for large ships, so the Seabees constructed one. Using prefabricated pontoon sections, they assembled floating piers capable of supporting heavy cargo. These modular docks extended into the water, allowing supply ships to unload fuel, ammunition, and vehicles directly onto the island. Every crate unloaded accelerated the transformation. Fuel storage tanks rose from the cleared earth. Temporary hospitals took shape from Quonset huts, curved steel structures that could be assembled rapidly. Communication towers pierced the skyline. Defensive gun embankments were reinforced with sandbags and timber. All of it happened simultaneously. The island was no longer just a captured objective. It was becoming a machine. The men paid a price for the speed. Equipment broke down under constant use, bulldozer tracks snapped, engines overheated, spare parts were scarce, mechanics worked through the night cannibalizing damaged machines to keep others running. Malaria cases began to appear. Insects swarmed work sites. Medical teams distributed quinine and monitored fevers, but the pace did not slow. Japanese forces attempted harassment attacks under cover of darkness. Small groups probed the perimeter. Flares lit the night sky. Seabees manned defensive positions when necessary, fighting alongside Marines to repel threats before returning to their construction duties at dawn. This dual role, builder and defender, defined the operation. By the third week, the runway had taken shape. Test landings began cautiously. An aircraft circled once, then descended. Its wheels touched the steel-plated surface. For a moment, everyone held their breath. The aircraft rolled safely to a stop. Cheers erupted across the field, but there was no time to celebrate. The project was far from complete. A naval base required more than a runway. It required supply depots, maintenance facilities, storage for thousands of barrels of fuel, fresh water systems, and reinforced docks. The Seabees accelerated. Convoys of trucks moved constantly across the growing network of graded roads. Concrete mixers churned day and night. Welding torches flashed in the darkness. The once quiet island pulsed with mechanical life. Japanese intelligence observed the transformation with disbelief. Their engineers had estimated years. Weeks were passing. By day 40, the base was operational. Aircraft launched daily patrols from the newly built airstrip. Warships docked at the pontoon piers to refuel. Bombers used the island as a staging ground for strikes deeper into enemy territory. What had been jungle and coral barely 2 months earlier was now a fully functioning naval and air installation. On the 50th day, the scale of what had been accomplished became undeniable. Runways stretched across leveled ground. Fuel farms stood secured behind protective berms. Barracks housed thousands of personnel. Defensive batteries guarded the perimeter. Supply warehouses stacked high with ammunition and rations. The island had been transformed in 50 days. Not years, 50 days. The Japanese belief that time and terrain would shield them had been shattered. The Seabees had done more than build a base. They had demonstrated that industrial power, organization, and relentless determination could overcome geography itself. In modern war, speed is power, and in 50 relentless days, the builders of the U.S. Navy proved that they could move faster than anyone had thought possible. The Pacific would never look the same again. By the time the 50th day arrived, the island was no longer vulnerable. It was a weapon. From the air, the transformation was unmistakable. Where there had once been tangled jungle and shattered coral, long steel runways now cut across the landscape. Supply ships lined the newly built piers. Anti-aircraft guns stood ready along the perimeter. What had taken nature centuries to shape had been reorganized by human hands in less than 2 months. And almost immediately, the impact was felt across the Pacific. American aircraft began launching daily patrols from the new base. Fighters extended protective air cover over surrounding waters. Bombers pushed deeper into Japanese-controlled territory. Reconnaissance planes scanned vast stretches of ocean that had once been blind spots. Control of the sky meant control of movement. Japanese convoys that once traveled cautiously but confidently now faced constant threat. Supply ships were spotted earlier, intercepted sooner, destroyed more frequently. The defensive ring Japan had worked so carefully to construct began to crack. The new base also became a forward logistics hub for the U.S. Navy. Warships no longer needed to return hundreds or even thousands of miles to rear bases for fuel and minor repairs. Destroyers and cruisers docked at the Seabees pontoon piers. Fuel hoses ran continuously. Ammunition was transferred efficiently. Damaged vessels received emergency maintenance that allowed them to rejoin operations quickly. Distance, once Japan's greatest advantage, was shrinking. This rapid transformation fit perfectly into America's emerging island-hopping strategy. Rather than attacking every fortified position, U.S. forces targeted strategically valuable islands that could support airfields and naval facilities. Once secured and built up, those islands became stepping stones for the next advance. Each leap brought American forces closer to Japan. The newly constructed base served as a launch pad for coordinated operations alongside the United States Marine Corps. Amphibious assaults became more sustainable. Aircraft provided close air support for ground troops. Naval artillery received better targeting information thanks to reconnaissance flights operating from the island. The rhythm of the war began to change. Instead of reacting to Japanese movements, American commanders increasingly dictated tempo. Carrier groups operated with greater confidence, knowing nearby airstrips could provide backup. Submarines received updated intelligence from reconnaissance units flying daily missions. For Japanese planners, the implications were alarming. Their strategy had assumed that even if the United States captured certain islands, it would take months, perhaps years, to convert them into effective bases. That delay was meant to provide time for counterattacks, reinforcements, or the strengthening of inner defensive lines. But 50 days shattered that timeline. Before Japan could reorganize, the island was fully operational. Before engineers could even begin calculating a response, American aircraft were already flying from the new runway. The psychological impact was profound. Reports reaching Japanese command described the speed of construction with disbelief. Intelligence officers questioned whether estimates had been wrong or whether American capabilities had been underestimated entirely. The answer was both. America had combined industrial capacity, organizational planning, and specialized construction battalions in a way unprecedented in military history. War was no longer just a matter of ships and soldiers. It was a contest of engineering and production. And in that contest, America held a decisive advantage. The base also became a symbol to American forces. For Marines preparing for the next assault, it represented security. Wounded soldiers could be evacuated quickly to functioning hospitals. Supplies would not run dry. Air cover would not disappear at dusk. The knowledge that Seabees could transform chaos into infrastructure boosted morale across the theater. Behind every frontline advance stood a growing network of built islands, each one reinforcing the next. The island's runways supported bombing campaigns that targeted Japanese airfields and shipping lanes. Long-range aircraft extended patrol zones, tightening the noose around remaining strongholds. Naval fleets operated more aggressively, knowing logistical support was now closer than ever. The cumulative effect was momentum. War in the Pacific had once seemed defined by vast emptiness, by water stretching endlessly in every direction. Now that emptiness was being filled with American-built footholds. With each new base, the reach of American power extended further west. Japanese supply lines, already strained by submarine attacks, faced additional pressure. Aircraft launched from the new island intercepted transport ships before they could reinforce distant garrisons. Air superiority shifted steadily toward American forces, and all of it traced back to speed. Had the base taken years to build, Japan's defensive strategy might have held longer. Reinforcements could have arrived, counteroffensives might have disrupted American expansion, but 50 days left no room for recovery. The lesson was clear. Modern warfare favored those who could mobilize not only armies, but infrastructure at extraordinary pace. By late 1943 and into 1944, this pattern repeated across the Pacific. Capture, build, advance. Each new base shortened the distance to Japan's home islands. Each runway expanded the range of American bombers. Each dock sustained fleets that would participate in ever larger operations. The balance of power was shifting. What began as a desperate recovery after Pearl Harbor had evolved into a coordinated, relentless advance. The Pacific was no longer a Japanese lake guarded by fortified atolls. It was becoming a network of American staging grounds. And at the center of that transformation were men who built under fire. The island completed in 50 days was not merely a construction achievement. It was proof that the war's outcome would be determined not just by courage in battle, but by mastery of logistics, engineering, and speed. In the vast theater of the Pacific, where miles of ocean once served as protection, a new reality had emerged. Distance could be conquered. Time could be compressed, and the tide of war, once flowing in Japan's favor, was beginning to turn decisively in the other direction. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945 and the Pacific War came to an end, the islands remained. Airstrips carved from coral, deep water piers extending into once empty lagoons, fuel depots, hospitals, barracks, and supply roads stretching across terrain that had once been jungle. These were not temporary footprints. They were permanent marks of transformation. And behind many of them stood the Seabees. By the end of World War II, the United States Naval Construction Battalions had built more than bases. They had built the physical backbone of victory across the Pacific. Over 300,000 men had served as Seabees during the war. They constructed hundreds of airfields, thousands of miles of roads, countless bridges, warehouses, hospitals, and ports. But their greatest achievement was not measured in concrete or steel. It was measured in time. The 50-day base had proven something revolutionary. In modern warfare, engineering speed could be as decisive as firepower. A fleet without fuel is powerless. Aircraft without runways cannot fly. Troops without supply lines cannot advance. The Seabees turned logistics into a weapon. Their success reshaped how militaries around the world thought about infrastructure. Construction was no longer a secondary function to be handled after territory was secured. It became an immediate front-line priority. Build fast or lose ground. After the war, many Seabees returned to civilian life. They went back to building highways, skyscrapers, bridges, and dams across America. Some used the GI Bill to further their education in engineering and architecture. Others resumed careers interrupted by war. But the Naval Construction Battalions did not disappear. The United States recognized the permanent value of a dedicated military construction force. During the early years of the Cold War, Seabees were deployed again, this time to build airfields in remote Arctic regions, naval facilities in the Mediterranean, and infrastructure across the Pacific as tensions with the Soviet Union escalated. They constructed bases in harsh climates from Alaska to the Middle East. They built communication stations, submarine facilities, and airstrips designed for jet aircraft. The lessons learned in Coral Islands under fire became doctrine. Speed, adaptability, self-sufficiency. The Seabees refined their ability to deploy rapidly anywhere in the world. Heavy equipment could be loaded onto ships or aircraft and transported to undeveloped terrain. Within days, runways and operational facilities could begin taking shape. The 50-day miracle had become a template. Over the decades, Seabees participated in conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. In each case, their mission remained the same: enable the fight. Build forward operating bases, repair damaged infrastructure, create stability in unstable environments. But their role extended beyond war. Seabees were often among the first responders after natural disasters. When hurricanes devastated coastal regions, when earthquakes reduced cities to rubble, Seabee units deployed to restore power, clear debris, and rebuild essential services. Their wartime training in harsh conditions made them uniquely suited for crisis response. In this way, the legacy of the Pacific War lived on, not only in battlefields, but in humanitarian missions. The story of the 50-day base carried symbolic weight. It represented the broader industrial mobilization of the United States during World War II. American factories produced aircraft and ships at unprecedented rates. Shipyards launched vessels faster than enemy submarines could sink them. Assembly lines ran day and night. The Seabees were the field expression of that industrial power. They proved that America's strength was not limited to manufacturing weapons. It included the ability to project infrastructure across oceans, to build functioning cities where nothing had existed weeks before. Japanese planners had calculated in years. The Seabees operated in weeks. That contrast defined the Pacific War's later stages. As American forces moved closer to Japan's home islands, the growing network of bases tightened operational reach. Long-range bombers eventually launched missions that would have been impossible without the chain of constructed airfields stretching across the ocean. The lesson was simple but profound. Control of territory in modern war depends on the ability to reshape it quickly. Today, the Seabees still operate under the same motto first adopted in 1942. We build, we fight. It remains more than a slogan. It is a philosophy forged in coral dust and monsoon rain. The 50-day base stands as a reminder that wars are not won solely by those who pull triggers or command fleets. They are won by those who ensure aircraft can land, ships can refuel, and soldiers can receive medical care miles from home. Engineering became strategy. Concrete became momentum. Steel became victory. In the vast Pacific of World War II, an island once dismissed as a years-long project was transformed in 50 relentless days. That achievement echoed far beyond its shores. It reshaped military planning, accelerated a turning tide, and demonstrated that preparation, organization, and determination could overcome even the most daunting geography. Long after the last bomb fell, the runways remained. And in those runways, carved from coral under enemy fire, lived the enduring legacy of the Seabees.